Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
My name is James Brooks, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm in remission, not recovery, because you never truly recover from this addiction. It took me a long time to fully grasp that this is a disease, and trust me, it is an illness. Alcoholism cost me everything, my job, my marriage, and my children, before I finally accepted the truth and sought help. The price I paid was far too steep, and if I could, I'd do anything to turn back time and start over with a clean slate. When things started unraveling, I'd been married to Sophia Johnson for 17 years. We had two amazing kids, Amelia Brooks, who was 15 at the time, and Noah Brooks, 13. To be honest, I later realized our problems went further back than I initially thought. Sophia Johnson, my wife, is a beautiful woman. She's 5 feet 5 inches with striking dark brown hair. When we first met, she wore it in a ponytail, but after we got married, she cut it short for convenience. Even after having 2 kids, she maintained her stunning figure. We met in school, and from the moment I saw her, I was drawn to her. Sophia Johnson had a natural elegance. No matter what she wore, it always looked effortlessly chic. When I first asked her out, she turned me down, but I didn't give up. Every couple of weeks, I'd ask her again until finally, she said yes. We started dating, though it wasn't exclusive at first. She went out with other guys, and I didn't pry or demand explanations. Maybe that's what intrigued her. I had a few other girlfriends too, and I think she was more jealous than I ever was. She always seemed to find out who I was seeing and exactly how far things had gone, and she was usually right. After leaving 6th form, Sophia Johnson attended a stage school in Wellington. She had the ambition and talent to be an actress, and that was her goal. Her course was scheduled to last for 2 years, so we parted as friends. It was to be 4 years before our paths crossed again. I, on the other hand, remained in our hometown of Pine Hill and started work as a trainee salesman in the service sector. It was mostly boring, but I learned the basics of selling, and after a few years, moved on to work for a major RV distributor called Central Logistics, or CF for convenience. At about this time, I was still living at the home of my Uncle Mike. My parents died in a major pileup on the motorway when I was 13, and my uncle and aunt took me in and cared for me. They were a childless couple, and I grew to love them both as they loved me. Sadly, my aunt died of cancer when I was 21, and Uncle Henry started drinking more and more heavily. Fortunately, he had some good friends who helped steer him off the self-destructive path he was on, and he stopped drinking almost overnight. I was good at my job and soon started to move up the ladder. Selling vehicles is hard work. A salesman has to know his customers very well and understand their business. CF was selected as the launch dealership for a new goods vehicle manufactured by CargoMax. My boss offered me the chance to develop the whole sales program, who to target, prepare the launch promotion, and organize the whole thing. Most of the planning was pretty easy. CargoMax would provide all the promotional material, the trucks, and most of the budget. All I had to do was deliver the sales. The main launch plan I developed was a sort of track day, but instead of fast cars, we would have 2 of the new trailers on static display and 2 more available for our customers to take out on the track, ungoverned. I proposed to let our customers try them out and give them the chance to have a thrash flat out around the circuit. My boss accepted this plan but wanted some models to decorate the static vehicles and tempt the customers to stay on and enjoy the day. Sex sells was his motto. I struggled to find a company that could provide suitable models. Then I remembered Sophia Johnson. We had kept in touch and even dated on occasion when she was home visiting her parents. We got on well together, but the trouble was, her career was based in Wellington, and she was reluctant to give up her lifestyle. She had attended stage school, and her ambition was to be an actress. She had yet to make the breakthrough but was still confident that she would. She freely admitted she was struggling to make a living as an actor, but modeling had helped supplement her earnings. I contacted her and explained my problem. She told me to give her a couple of days, and she would get back to me. She did better than that and was on the phone the next morning with costs and told me she was emailing me some photographs of models for selection. That afternoon, I had a review meeting with my boss and was able to present him with the complete package and budget projections. He reviewed the presentation and gave me the go-ahead on the spot. The promotion went like clockwork, and the models were a great success with our customers. Scantily clad models draped over and behind the wheel of these huge articulated lorries kept the punters interested all day. It took a few months, but the orders for the new vehicles soon started to come in. Sophia Johnson and I spent a lot of time together planning the event, and before long, we became an item. As our feelings deepened and passions mounted, I discovered that she was an adventurous lover and quite the exhibitionist. I guess it was the actress in her. She loved the thrill of doing it in risky places, on the beach during a weekend getaway, in the car at Lover's Lane. Once, we even got caught, and two elderly men got quite an eyeful. We made a hurried exit, but not before Sophia Johnson stopped and kissed them both on the cheek. I could not get enough of her, and we continued much of our courtship in the same vein. 2 years later, we got married. We set up house together in Pine Hill, but she continued to work and had some success in TV commercials. Things were starting to look up for her when she got cast in a daytime TV soap as the opinionated catalyst that provided the other actors a foil to work against. Then she got pregnant with Amelia Brooks. She was at a loss to understand how, as she was on the pill, but the doctor told her that the only sure method of birth control was total abstinence. Sophia Johnson was worried that the soap producers would cancel her contract, but to her surprise, they wrote her pregnancy into the storyline. Her part suddenly started to grow, as did her belly. They even wanted to record the baby's birth, but I stopped that in its infancy. I think Sophia Johnson was disappointed, but she didn't push it. After Amelia Brooks was born, Sophia Johnson pulled back on her career. She committed herself to being a full-time wife and mother. We settled into a life of domestic harmony that lasted for the next 3 or 4 years. During this time, Noah Brooks was born, and we were now a complete family. Sophia Johnson was a good mother, and her love for our babies shone through. She was the one who got up in the middle of the night when they were little, well, most of the time anyway. She would spend hours with them, teaching them to pronounce words and reading stories to them from the dozens of children's books we had. When Noah Brooks started school, Sophia Johnson approached me and told me that she wanted to return to work. We discussed the ramifications. My concerns were that our family life would suffer, as actors work odd hours and could be away from home for long periods. Sophia Johnson assured me she would only consider roles she could fit in during the day, not involving any overnight assignments. We agreed to give it a try, and Sophia Johnson contacted her agent. He was delighted that she was resurrecting her career, and she soon had auditions lined up. She picked up some work doing voiceovers for commercials. True to her word, during those first couple of years, Sophia Johnson was always there for us, and we were a happy, close-knit family. Our sex life was about as good as it gets. We made love 4 or 5 times a week and rarely had any arguments. The first signs of change came around 8 years ago. Sophia Johnson accepted a role in a new play. The issue was that the theater was in York, and it meant long days. During rehearsals, the commute times added up, and she was out of the house before 6:30 in the morning, returning well after 7:30 in the evening. We could live with that during rehearsals, but once the play opened to great success, she was absent from our lives until going on midnight most nights. The travel was just too much, so she made arrangements to stop overnight at the flat of one of her fellow actresses. At first, she would only do this once or twice a week, but gradually, over the next few months, it got so that she was away 3 or 4 nights a week. Her contract allowed her 1 day off every week, and that became our lifeline, but the strain was telling on our marriage. Our sex life was now virtually on hold, and even though we all traveled up to York every other weekend to spend time with her, Sophia Johnson was getting harder to communicate with. Meanwhile, I had 2 young children to care for in addition to my demanding job. Her mother was a godsend. She came over every day with an evening meal prepared and was there when the kids returned from school. I drifted into the habit of having a couple of drinks every night. The kids were not alone in missing Sophia Johnson. The event that triggered my suspicion that she might be unfaithful occurred during the award season. They are traditionally held in mid-February each year, and this year was no exception. You know, the kind of thing where the TV, film, and theater crowd get together to pat themselves on the back. Sophia Johnson was nominated for an award as a supporting actress, and she phoned and asked me to accompany her to the dinner and ceremony. I thought this was a great chance to try and mend bridges, so I arranged for her mother to babysit and joined Sophia Johnson at her shared flat. I showered, changed into my penguin suit, and waited until Sophia Johnson was dressed to join me. She looked absolutely fabulous. I complimented her on her gown, and she hugged me, but when I tried to kiss her, she rebuffed me with, "I've spent ages on my makeup, please don't spoil it for me." At the dinner, I was introduced to Adam Monroe, the play's director, and some of the cast. Also at the table were Vincent Moore, the producer, and a couple of others. George was a big man, around 6 feet tall and about 53 years old, I would have guessed, but he was running to fat now and looked even older. The dinner and the awards went on, but finally, it was over. Sophia Johnson duly won her award and thanked everyone for their help and support throughout her career. I guess I was the only one to notice that she made no mention of me or our children, who probably made the biggest sacrifice of all. That hurt. She rejoined me at our table and accepted the kisses and hugs from everyone seated there or nearby. No restrictions on kissing now, she was pretty enthusiastic about it, all thoughts about disturbing her makeup long forgotten. I felt as though I was being deliberately ignored, so I helped myself to the abundant bottles of wine on the table. Eventually, it was time to leave, and I was impatient to get back to the flat. I was keen to strip that gown off her, I wanted her so badly, but Sophia Johnson insisted we had to attend a party that the producers of the play were hosting. So, I hid my disappointment and reluctantly tagged along. The alcohol was flowing at the party, and I was introduced to so many people that I lost track of time. I was drinking steadily and needed to relieve myself, so I found the toilet. Unfortunately, there was a queue, and as I stood there behind 2 striking young ladies, I overheard them talking about Sophia Johnson. One said, "Of course, I heard that she only got the part because she was prepared to spread her legs for Vincent Moore and his backers." The other woman giggled and said, "Well, good luck to her. My friend went out with him and told me he liked rough sex. She said she could hardly walk or sit down for days afterwards, so she'll learn every part she gets." Here's another bit of gossip I heard from a contact in the theater: he keeps her at his beck and call, and she can never get her day off to see her kids. He insists that she be available to service him whenever the mood takes him. It's her husband I feel sorry for, he's at home looking after the kids while she cheats around on him. I was struck dumb. They must be mistaken. My Sophia Johnson would never cheat on me, but as I struggled to digest what I had heard, a little voice in the back of my head kept whispering in my ear that what I had overheard would account for some of our problems. I tried to dismiss it, but it remained a persistent irritation every time I looked at her. I escaped from the queue and went outside for some fresh air, peeing in the bushes as I tried to decide what to do with the information I had overheard. I was more composed when I returned to the party and went to find Sophia Johnson. I soon found her at the center of a group of men, including Vincent Moore and 3 other co-producers. She informed me that these were some of the backers of the play. I tried to keep myself under control. If just some of the backers turned out to be 4 men, how many more were there? And how many did she have to sleep with to get the role? The conversation was a little stilted, and George in particular seemed ill at ease in my presence. I wondered if he had a guilty conscience. I was tempted to confront Sophia Johnson right then, but I had no proof, and after all, the gossips could be wrong. I decided to maintain my silence. When Sophia Johnson asked me to get her another drink, it gave me an excuse to leave their company. I thought I saw a look of relief on the producers' faces as I left. I got another drink for Sophia Johnson, and after I handed it to her, I subtly signaled that I wanted to leave soon, but she shook her head and turned her back on me to continue her discussion with her admirers. I felt left out and abandoned once more, so I sought solace at the bar. In short, I drank myself legless before nodding off in an armchair. It must have been an hour or so later that I was jerked out of my sleep by a kick to my shins. Sophia Johnson was ready to leave, and she was clearly disgusted with me. I was still too drunk to care. The next morning, things were icy. No, that's wrong, they were Arctic. I tried to apologize for my excesses of the evening before, but she called me a drunk and accused me of ruining her big night, plus a lot of other things besides, none of them complimentary. I wanted to talk about our marriage, but clearly, that wasn't going to happen that day. She stormed out of the flat, saying she would talk to me when she returned. She never said where she was going. Sometime later, I got a call from her mother telling me that Noah Brooks was sick. She thought it was appendicitis and had asked the doctor to call. I told her I would catch the next train home and packed my overnight gear before I left. I tried to call Sophia Johnson on her mobile, but it went straight to voicemail, so I wrote her a short note explaining briefly my reason for my early departure. I didn't go into detail about Noah Brooks's condition, let her do something for herself if she still cared about us. When I got back 2 hours later, Noah Brooks was in the city hospital undergoing an appendectomy. Sophia Johnson's parents were there, as was Amelia Brooks. We greeted each other with hugs, and her mother told me he had just gone into surgery. The surgeon had said that the prognosis was good, Noah Brooks was young and fit, and there was no reason for undue concern. Sophia Johnson's parents asked where she was, and I said simply, I have no idea. I tried calling her several times from the train and had to leave messages each time. Her mother took out her phone and tried calling Sophia Johnson with the same result. After what seemed like ages, the surgeon came out and told us the operation went perfectly and that we would be able to see Noah Brooks in an hour or so, once he had recovered from the anesthetic. A couple of hours later, we were all sitting around his bed chatting when Sophia Johnson stormed into the room, looking like she was ready to slay anyone who impeded her. She wasted no time berating me for not telling her that her son was ill and would not listen to any responses. Her father grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly out of the ward, telling her to get herself under control. I moved to follow them, but her mother stepped in front of me and said, "Best leave it to her father, son. You are like a son to both of us, and maybe a few home truths from her dad will be more effective this time." I could see the sense in that and turned back to reassure Noah Brooks and Amelia Brooks that their mother was just strung out with the pressures of her work. 10 minutes later, a contrite Sophia Johnson came in and apologized to everyone for her behavior. Her concern for Noah Brooks had gotten the better of her. She hugged Noah Brooks, and after finding out that he was getting better, proceeded to regale everyone about her triumph at the awards ceremony. Visiting time was over in a blink, and we departed. When we reached the foyer, there stood Vincent Moore, obviously waiting for Sophia Johnson. I said nothing and brushed past him. I guess I now had the truth of the rumor. I waited in the car with Amelia Brooks while Sophia Johnson stood talking animatedly with George. I watched as she turned to leave him, but he pulled her around, and they kissed goodbye, not that unusual, but she kissed him on the lips. Sophia Johnson joined us in the car and acted as if there was nothing odd about what we had just witnessed. Amelia Brooks was clearly upset and challenged her mother about the kiss. "What's with you and him?" "That was more than a thank you kiss," she said, pointing at George. "Are you and Dad getting a divorce or separating?" she asked. Good question, I thought, as the same one was on my lips as well. I had heard the rumors, Amelia Brooks couldn't have known about them, so her question was very perceptive. Sophia Johnson replied, "Of course not. I was thanking George for bringing me all the way from York today." "When are you returning to your job?" I asked, because I think Noah Brooks needs you here at this time. "I'll stop over tonight and return tomorrow afternoon in time for the evening performance. He's out of danger now, and I'm sure you and Mom can cope until he gets out of the hospital." "I'll arrange to take some time off during his convalescence," she replied. I was really pissed off with her reply and let my anger get the better of me. "You are something else, you know that," I exploded. "Our son is still in the hospital, and all you can think about is getting back to your stupid career. Maybe, just maybe, you should reflect on that decision because if you don't, there will be consequences that neither you nor I can control or foresee." We arrived home, and a tight-lipped Sophia Johnson went upstairs to our bedroom and did not reappear that night. At one point, I took her some sandwiches and coffee. I knocked on the door, and she opened it, took the tray from me without comment, and closed the door in my face. I slept in Noah Brooks's bed that night and for the next few nights as well. In the morning, over breakfast, Sophia Johnson informed Amelia Brooks and me that she had reconsidered and decided to take a sabbatical from the play until Noah Brooks was fully recovered. She also made it very clear that she was doing this under duress and that I was the one being held responsible. Over the next few weeks, Sophia Johnson tried very hard to make things right between her and the children. I never went back to our bedroom and never tried to get intimate with her. Within 3 weeks, Noah Brooks was back to normal, and Sophia Johnson informed us that she was returning to her role on stage in York the following week. She did make a few concessions and promised that she would be home every other night, and for the first 2 weeks, she was. The first time she failed to turn up, I phoned, worried that something had happened since she had not contacted us. It was well after 13:30 in the morning, and she was usually back by midnight. Her phone was answered by Vincent Moore, who explained that Sophia Johnson was in the shower and would ring me back, which she duly did. I immediately asked why she was still in York, and she came up with some lame excuse about feeling too tired to come home that night. I asked her rather pointedly, "Why is he there?" She must have heard the anger in my voice as she tried to placate me by promising to be home tomorrow. I had enough and said, "I noticed you failed to answer my question, so I'll ask you once more, why is George in your room at this time of night? Does that make my question clear enough, or do I need to spell it out for you?" She replied, "He was just leaving. I'll talk to you tomorrow." Then she hung up. I started on the whiskey, and when that was finished, the vodka washed it down nicely. She failed to come home the following night, and I called her once more and was forced to leave a message telling her not to bother coming home unless it was for good. I started hitting the bottle heavily. With hindsight, it was clear that I was simply running away from confronting the problems with my marriage. It was easier to drown my problems than face up to them. My marriage might soon be over, and this habit grew. I was drinking a bottle of spirits every night after the kids had gone to bed. It didn't matter what it was, whiskey, rum, you name it, I drank it. Sophia Johnson eventually returned home one night after the show and found me passed out in the chair, the empty bottle still clutched to my chest. She went ballistic and accused me of being totally irresponsible. "What if something had happened, like a fire or something?" she yelled. I was still half drunk as I mumbled something in response to the effect that if she was at home more often, the situation would not have arisen. All hell broke loose after that. She was livid and went to bed. The following day was a Saturday, so no work for me, at least. Sophia Johnson spent some time with the kids before having to leave for York again. She didn't say a word to me before she left. I tried to make amends by calling her repeatedly on her phone but never got any response. She failed to come home the following week, even on her day off. She did phone the kids on their mobiles every day but made no effort to contact me. I started drinking more. One bottle was not enough to dull my loneliness. Apart from the kids and me, her mother naturally was the one to notice her absence and forced me to sit down and face the issue. I told her about our troubles, and she said she would try to talk some sense into her daughter. Sophia Johnson came home the next night, and we had a long heart-to-heart at last. I don't know what her mother said to her, but she was in a far more conciliatory mood. She accepted that her present job was the root cause of our problems and told me that she had decided to quit. She would have to give them 2 weeks' notice and said she would email them that night. I challenged her about her relationship with Vincent Moore, and she assured me that she had not had an affair with him or anyone else. She was very convincing. After all, she was an actress, and in any case, I wanted desperately to believe her. I decided to let sleeping dogs lie. She also got her digs in about my excessive drinking, and I promised to curtail it, and I did, even though I refused to admit, even to myself, that I was overdoing it. The make-up sex was fantastic, and the only thing I did notice was that she started to talk dirty to me while we were intimate. It was strange. While we always talked during our lovemaking before, the difference was that now she was describing her fantasies to me and encouraging me to do the same. I asked her where this new twist came from, and she told me that her flatmate and she had nothing much to do during the day, so they got into discussing their deepest, hidden fantasies with each other. She asked me if I found this change to our love life disturbing, and I told her that as long as they remained fantasies, I had no issue with it. From then on, we introduced more and more wild themes into our sex life. The next few years were more settled, and Sophia Johnson picked up enough work locally to keep her busy. Pressure at my work was getting steadily more onerous. The trade was going through a hard spell, the recession was looming, and one of the first effects was that companies held onto their fleets longer. This, coupled with the high fuel costs, meant that our customers were holding back on reinvesting, so trying to sell in that market was stressful. My boss was not really interested in excuses. It was my job to sell, and I was told in no uncertain terms that if I couldn't cut it, he would get someone who could. Once more, my drinking took control of my life. I used the excuse that it was due to the pressure at work. In an effort to close a deal with one of my customers, I took him out to a nice restaurant and entertained him, perhaps too well. We were both as drunk as skunks and were at the stage where dirty jokes were being told, and I had just suggested that we move on to a local club. We were both very drunk, and unfortunately, unknown to either of us, his wife had employed a private investigator as she was looking for evidence to support her bargaining position in their upcoming divorce. She got all she needed that night, complete with photographs. She also sent copies to my employer and Sophia Johnson. The following morning, the customer called my boss and told him that we had lost his business and why. My boss called me into his office and fired me on the spot. Sophia Johnson was livid when she saw the photographs of me at the club, with a woman inappropriately close. She went ballistic. The feeble excuse that it was just business cut no ice with her. Needless to say, things were pretty frigid around the house for the next month. Unemployed and almost unemployable, I thought that with my track record, I would have little problem getting another job in sales. But opportunities were few, and even getting an interview was tough. I had a couple of really good interviews and thought I had a good chance of securing a job, but each time, I got knocked back. The word had gone around about my drinking, and my self-confidence suffered. I got into the habit of having a few drinks every night to unwind. Sophia Johnson still wasn't being very responsive to me, so those few drinks soon became many more, and I was left to sleep on the couch more often than not. Sophia Johnson gave up trying to stop me from drinking. I wouldn't have paid any attention anyway. Our marriage was heading only one way, and I was too drunk to realize it. The children were in their mid-teens when Sophia Johnson was offered a role in a new late-night drama series or adult soap opera. This soap differed from the usual daytime format as it was to be broadcast after 10 p.m., which allowed the writers to embrace far more mature themes. Sophia Johnson's role was to be the provocative sexbot, the one who flirts with other women's husbands, dresses daringly, and exudes sex appeal. She played that kind of part extremely well. After all, it almost came naturally to her. The doubts I had about her fidelity resurfaced when I discovered that the series was to be produced by none other than Vincent Moore. The first series was to consist of 10-hour-long episodes, and filming was to be in the production company's Cambridge studios, with external scenes shot mostly in the nearby countryside. Sophia Johnson accepted the part without any discussion. She simply announced that she had taken the role. This meant that once again, she would be unable to return home each evening and would rent a flat during the shoot. The filming was scheduled to last 6 months. Since she was the sole breadwinner, I could hardly object. By this stage, I was only sober first thing in the morning, and by lunchtime, I needed a pick-me-up to help me through the day. I wasn't necessarily drunk, but I was far from sober. By the evening, I was well-oiled if not plastered. Sophia Johnson was getting desperate about my drinking and worried about leaving the children in my care, or so she said in an effort to get me to stop. She contacted Uncle Henry, who came over and tried to make me see what I was doing to myself and my marriage. I refused to accept that I had a problem and continued as before. Sophia Johnson simply washed her hands of me and made arrangements for her mother to keep an eye on the children. Once Sophia Johnson had moved temporarily to Cambridge, I realized that things were getting desperate and made an effort to reconnect with my kids. I thought I was doing quite well. I had cut down on my drinking and tried to re-establish relations with Sophia Johnson, but she was reluctant to discuss our problems on the phone. One day, after she had been gone for about 3 weeks, I went up to the studio in Cambridge to try and patch things up. At first, I had problems even getting in the door, security was tight, and I had to get one of the assistant floor managers to vouch for me before I was allowed on set. I was warned not to interrupt once the red light was on, as they were about to start shooting a scene. The assistant informed me that it was a raunchy scene, so I stood at the back and observed. Sophia Johnson had told me that the new show was going to be targeted at adults, but I didn't realize that she would be nearly naked in some of the scenes. I watched as she and a man, I later found out his name was William Lewis, performed a deep, passionate kiss and slowly sank onto the sofa on the set. The man was wearing only a pair of boxers, and Sophia Johnson had a silk robe loosely tied at the waist. She shrugged her shoulders, and the robe dropped to the floor. It was clear the editor would be busy tidying this scene up. There was no way it could be broadcast on a public network. If she was just acting aroused, then she was a better actress than I ever gave her credit for. The scene came to an abrupt end when William Lewis couldn't hold back anymore and climaxed unexpectedly. The director, Matthew Harper, called it a wrap, and everybody burst out laughing, much to William Lewis's embarrassment. They tried again, and this time, they got it right. Matthew Harper called cut before the pair slowly drew apart, still gazing into each other's eyes. Even a blind man could see the lust in their expressions. As William Lewis pulled her to her feet, she bent down, gathered her robe, and ever so slowly pulled it back on. The director called for a lunch break, and Sophia Johnson walked over to Matthew Harper, seeking reassurance that the scene wasn't too graphic. Matthew Harper kissed her on the cheek, took her hand, and they strolled toward the dressing rooms together. I quickly crossed the room and, without knocking, barged into the dressing room after them. I found them in an intimate embrace. When Sophia Johnson saw me, she tried to push him away, but he was still holding her. She hissed at him to get off, and he reluctantly let go when he realized who I was. Matthew Harper looked pale and seemed to be searching for a way to escape, but there was none except to go through me. I thumped him once on the cheek and again on the jaw, and that was all it took. He went down and stayed down. Sophia Johnson had taken the opportunity to pull her robe back on and just sat there, waiting for me to say something. When I refused to react as she expected, she said simply, "I want a divorce. I'm not going to remain married to a drunk. Just so you know, he isn't the only one who has been benefiting from your inability to perform lately, but he's the best so far." So there it was. I had lost first my job, and now my wife. In the weeks that followed, I was served with divorce papers. I was drunk most of the time and stupidly signed anything put in front of me. I found out later that because I neglected to get a lawyer, I had signed away the house and all our assets. I even lost visitation rights to my children, as her lawyer successfully argued that I was an alcoholic and not fit to be in charge of their welfare. I tried to call Amelia Brooks and Noah Brooks, but Sophia Johnson had changed the numbers. I was depressed, so I drank more. The more I drank, the more depressed I became. The final indignity occurred some weeks later. I was on the street, sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey with some other down-and-outs, when a group of young men started harassing us. In our drunken condition, we were in no state to defend ourselves. My abiding memory is lying in a gutter, bleeding from several cuts, while one of the youths urinated on me. Despite being drunk, I wasn't so far gone that I didn't recognize my own son, Noah Brooks, standing to one side, watching as his father was degraded in the street. Eventually, the police and an ambulance arrived, and I was taken to a hospital, where I was kept for a few days to allow my injuries to heal. The first morning after I was admitted, Uncle Henry came to see me. He tore a strip off me and, when he was finished, started to leave. "Please, Uncle, I need help," I called out. "I know I spurned your warnings in the past, but I've finally realized that I have major problems with drinking. I'm begging you to help me." He paused and looked at me reflectively, as if trying to decide if I was worth the effort. Thank God he decided I was. He told me what I needed to do, warned me that it would be a hard road, but promised me support when I needed it. His final words to me that morning were that, in the end, it was all down to me. I had to want to get my life back on track more than I wanted to find the solution in a bottle. I won't bore you with all the details, but he was right, it was hard, far harder than I thought it would be. But with the continuing support of friends in AA, I managed to stay away from alcohol for 20 months now. As I said at the beginning, I am in remission, not recovering. I am still tempted every time I see people laughing and drinking, but so far, I have resisted. I know the consequences if I succumb again. When I was fit enough to be released from the clinic, Uncle Henry allowed me to return to my old flat in the basement of his property. His home was a ground-floor flat in a Victorian villa. Once a proper family home on 3 floors, it had been converted into separate flats years ago. When I was a teenager, he and my aunt bought the basement flat with the intention that I would have an independent place when I left school. I had lived there up until I married Sophia Johnson, and now I was back in my first home once more. By this time, Sophia Johnson had remarried. Her new husband was Matthew Harper, the director she was involved with when we split up. He was now living in my old home, the same one I had paid the mortgage on for most of our married life. But what the hell, it was time to move on. I tried to rebuild my relationship with my children, but I was warned off after my first attempt to make contact. Sophia Johnson's lawyer reached out, reminding me that the restraining order preventing me from seeing the kids was still in force. That infuriated me. It wasn't as if I had forgotten their birthdays or significant events. I had sent cards with a bit of money for each birthday, but they never wrote back. When I consulted a lawyer, he confirmed that by signing the divorce paperwork without legal counsel, I had essentially agreed not to have any contact with my family. He said he would try to petition to get the restraining order lifted, but it was unlikely, given that I hadn't been sober long enough to satisfy the court. Uncle Henry also provided me with a job working with him at his taxi and courier company. I started by manning the phones and helping with logistics. One day, a few months after I began, he was a driver short for a wedding, and he asked me to fill in. I was more than happy to help. Luckily, my driving license was still intact, God knows how, given the number of times I had driven under the influence. After that, he started using me to cover peak hours or when a driver called in sick, and I began to enjoy it. Saturday nights, watching people behave under the influence, reinforced my new sober lifestyle. I had been dry for about 20 months when Uncle Henry, sadly, passed away in his sleep. His funeral was attended by so many people that the crematorium could barely hold them all. I was his only living relative, and he left everything to me. Suddenly, I was in full charge of a business and responsible for the livelihoods of around 25 staff members. I kept the business running more or less the same way as before, although I had some ideas about making it more efficient. Still, I hesitated to change what was already a successful operation. Some months before he passed away, Uncle Henry had hired a woman named Emily Oliver Bennett to look after payroll and accounts. She was a single mother with a young child, and she was very good at her job. Her son, Oliver Bennett, was 9 years old, and he often came to the office after school to catch a lift home. Sarah and Oliver Bennett lived in a small rented house about 6 miles from the office. After Uncle Henry's death, I came to rely on Sarah more and more. She was an attractive woman, but I knew little about her beyond the fact that she was divorced. Over those first few weeks, I grew to value her good humor and ability to handle the drivers, who constantly flirted with her. One morning, I noticed Sarah seemed down, not her usual cheery self. She snapped at a couple of drivers who were teasing her, which was unlike her, as she usually gave as good as she got. I waited until things had settled down before going into her office and closing the door behind me. When I asked what was wrong, she burst into tears. Her landlord was evicting her for allegedly allowing the house to be used for illicit purposes, and for being behind on the rent. She swore it was untrue and said the real reason was that she had rejected his advances. I thought about it for a moment and came up with a possible solution. I told her about the basement flat, which was fully furnished. She would only need her personal belongings, and it was currently vacant. I also explained that the internal staircase leading from the basement to the ground floor had been reinstated when I lived there before, but she could lock the door for privacy. When she asked about the rent, I named an amount I knew she could afford, which was less than what she was paying. She accepted the offer without even seeing the place, and I arranged for a van and driver to help move her things that weekend. I intended to be the driver, mainly because I wanted a word with her landlord. We moved Sarah and Oliver Bennett into the flat in a few hours, and they seemed delighted with their new home. When I handed Sarah the key to the door leading to my flat above, she handed it right back, saying, "The door's always open for you." Then she burst into tears again. Both Oliver Bennett and I tried to comfort her, but she shook us off and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. She insisted that I come down for dinner with them as a thank you. I accepted, touched by the gesture. During dinner, I noticed there were only soft drinks on the table. When Oliver Bennett went to bed, I casually mentioned that she didn't need to abstain from alcohol just because I was present. She took a deep breath and said, "I thought Mike would have told you. I'm one of his waifs and strays. I'm an alcoholic, too. If it hadn't been for him, I would have lost Oliver Bennett forever." She continued, "Mike was the one who helped me realize my life was a mess. I was drunk, homeless, and jobless, and Oliver Bennett had been taken into care. I was doing whatever it took to get money for drink. There were plenty of men willing to share their bed for a night if it meant I'd have a roof over my head and a bottle to keep me going. Oliver Bennett knows all about my past, and now you do, too. It's not something I'm proud of, but I thought you should know." I rushed to reassure her. "Sarah, you did what you had to do to survive. I've been there too. I've done things I'm not proud of. What matters is that we've come through the worst of it, and now we've got a new chance. The past is behind us. Let's focus on the future." With that, I kissed her forehead and bade her good night. The next day, Sarah seemed more herself again. I avoided her on Sunday, but on Monday, I picked her up for work, and she looked worried. "If we arrive at the office together, the guys will gossip," she said. "I'll handle it," I assured her. Sure enough, just as we got out of the car, one of the drivers made a cheeky comment. I gathered everyone together and told them in no uncertain terms that any future comments about Sarah would be considered a disciplinary issue. I explained that she and her son lived in the basement flat, and it made sense to carpool rather than have her rely on public transport. The explanation seemed to clear the air, and things returned to normal. It was a bit of an occupational hazard, but I noticed that a couple of drivers had been subjected to both verbal and physical abuse during late-night shifts. Action had to be taken. The police were supportive and increased their patrols in the city center on weekends, but the real problem occurred when drivers were lured to fake addresses. Once out of the city, the passengers would rob or attack them. To protect my staff, I installed small CCTV cameras inside the vehicles. Stickers warned passengers that they were being recorded. The cameras started recording as soon as the rear doors were opened. I briefed the drivers on the new security measures, emphasizing that they were for safety and not to catch anyone out. To show my commitment, I took a cab out the following Friday and worked the entire shift with them. Just as the pubs were closing around midnight, I was hailed by some youth standing with a girl who looked worse for wear. Her long hair covered her face, making it difficult to identify her. 5 of them got in, with the girl seated in the middle. The guy in the front gave me an address, and I started driving. About halfway there, I heard the girl protesting, and I saw one of the lads had his hand on her thigh. I immediately pulled over and ordered them to stop. They didn't listen, so I drove to the nearest police station, just 2 minutes away. I jumped out and dragged them from the cab. As they argued, one of them noticed where we were and decided to leave quickly. The girl remained in the cab, quietly sobbing. I turned to help her out and froze when I recognized my daughter, Amelia Brooks. I drove her home, carried her up to the front door, and banged on it until someone answered. Arthur Davis, Sophia Johnson's husband, opened the door, half-dressed, and I pushed past him. Sophia Johnson appeared, wrapped in a robe, looking a little disheveled. I dropped Amelia Brooks onto the couch and started to remove her boots. Sophia Johnson was high as a kite, her glazed eyes and the faint traces of white powder on her nostrils made that clear. After I finished taking care of Amelia Brooks, Sophia Johnson pushed me out of the room, saying she'd handle it. As I left, I couldn't help but think about how things had come to this. When I got home, Sarah was still up. She handed me a cup of coffee as I walked in. She had heard about the incident from one of the other drivers. We talked for a long time, and as we sat there on the sofa, we grew closer. I kissed her softly, and before long, we were heading upstairs to my bedroom. As Sarah and I lay in bed afterward, we heard the sound of Oliver Bennett's small footsteps. He appeared at the door, looking puzzled. "What are you doing here, Mom? Why aren't you in your own bed?" he asked, glancing between us. Sarah quickly wrapped herself in the sheet and smiled. "I'm just keeping Jack company, Oliver Bennett," she said gently. "Go back to bed, sweetie. I'll be down soon." After Oliver Bennett left, Sarah chuckled, but there was also a hint of worry in her eyes. "I suppose we'll have to figure out how to explain this," she said. Over the next few days, I spent more time at Sarah's flat, and we began to feel like a family. Eventually, I moved in with her and Oliver Bennett officially. Things seemed to settle into a new normal. At work, I implemented more changes to the business, including expanding the courier service, and we saw steady growth. But the situation with Amelia Brooks and Noah Brooks weighed heavily on me. I had spoken to Sophia Johnson about what had happened the night I brought Amelia Brooks home, and although she promised to speak to her, I could sense that nothing was really going to change. The kids needed more than just an occasional visit from their mother, they needed a stable, present parent. A few months later, Sophia Johnson's life took another hit. The media once again got wind of her and Arthur Davis's scandalous lifestyle. A national tabloid published photos from one of their parties, accompanied by a lurid story about the couple's involvement in the underground adult film scene. According to the article, they had been targeted in a sting operation, with undercover reporters posing as guests at one of their gatherings. The story caused a public outcry, and both Sophia Johnson and Arthur Davis found themselves out of work. The production company dropped their show, and any offers for new roles dried up. Sophia Johnson's employers cut ties with her, and soon she and Arthur Davis were struggling financially. I heard about the situation from mutual friends, and I wasn't surprised when, shortly afterward, Sophia Johnson called me in tears, begging for help. "Please, Liam," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do. The kids won't even speak to me. I'm being hounded by reporters, and Arthur Davis has left me, he took everything. I've got nothing left. Sophia Johnson was frantic. She wanted me to take Amelia Brooks and Noah Brooks in for a while, at least until the scandal blew over. It wasn't a hard decision. I agreed to let the kids stay with me, and Sarah welcomed them with open arms. We set up a room for Amelia Brooks in the basement flat, while Noah Brooks shared a room with Oliver Bennett. It was a bit cramped, but we made it work. The adjustment was difficult at first. Amelia Brooks and Noah Brooks were angry and confused, hurt by their mother's actions and Arthur Davis's presence in their lives. The scandal and the chaotic lifestyle they had been exposed to took a toll on them. Sarah was a calming influence, though. She was patient and understanding, especially with Amelia Brooks, who was carrying the most emotional baggage. The children continued to visit Sophia Johnson occasionally, but their relationship remained strained. Each time they returned, they seemed more distant from her. Then, one day, Amelia Brooks came back from a visit looking devastated. I could tell immediately that something was wrong, so I asked Sarah to speak with her while I stayed with the boys. After about an hour, Sarah emerged and told me what had happened. During her visit, Amelia Brooks had walked in on Arthur Davis and Sophia Johnson in a compromising situation. Arthur Davis had made a lewd comment about Amelia Brooks joining in, and that was the last straw. She couldn't bring herself to see her mother anymore after that. I was furious. The thought of Arthur Davis leering at my daughter made my blood boil, and I stormed out of the house, determined to confront him. When I arrived at what used to be my family home, Arthur Davis answered the door. I pushed past him, demanding answers, but he just smirked, denying everything and taunting me. Sophia Johnson appeared, and when I told her what Arthur Davis had said, she brushed it off, claiming Amelia Brooks must have misunderstood. I couldn't believe it. I realized then that Sophia Johnson was too far gone to see how her choices had affected our children. I left, disgusted and resolved to protect my kids from further harm. After that incident, Amelia Brooks and Noah Brooks made it clear they wanted nothing more to do with their mother. They settled into life with me and Sarah, and slowly, things began to improve. The children were doing well in school, and they even began to refer to Sarah as Mom. It wasn't something we had asked of them, but it happened naturally over time, and Sarah embraced it. Our business continued to prosper, and eventually, a national company approached me with an offer to buy it. After careful consideration, I accepted. One of the conditions was that Sarah stay on for a year to help with the transition. This suited us, as it gave us time to plan our future. I was proud of what we had achieved, and selling the business provided us with the financial security we needed to start a new chapter. Not long after, I proposed to Sarah during a quiet dinner by the sea. I had been planning it for weeks and was thrilled when she said yes. We decided to have a small wedding, with only the kids in attendance. The ceremony was intimate and perfect, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had truly found peace. Jane and Noah Brooks continued to thrive. Jane had a knack for business, and after graduating, she joined the company where I used to work, quickly rising through the ranks. Noah Brooks, meanwhile, was accepted into an engineering program at university, where he also played on the rugby team. Oliver Bennett was growing up quickly, too. He had his heart set on becoming a pilot, and with Sarah and me by his side, he joined the university's air squadron as soon as he was old enough. His ambition and determination filled us with pride. As for Sophia Johnson, her life had taken a steep decline. Arthur Davis had drained her accounts and fled, leaving her with nothing. She eventually lost the house after being unable to keep up with the mortgage payments. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a nightclub in London. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, and despite everything that had happened, I felt a twinge of sadness for her. I wouldn't wish that fate on anyone, even someone who had caused me so much pain. Life moved on, and the years passed. Sarah and I found a quiet rhythm in our lives, enjoying the time we spent with our children and each other. We often talked about selling the house and moving abroad once Oliver Bennett finished school. But for now, we were content to stay put and let the kids finish growing up. Reflecting on everything, I realized that while my journey had been filled with hardships and mistakes, it had ultimately led me to where I needed to be. Sarah, Oliver Bennett, Jane, and Noah Brooks were my true family now. I had finally found the happiness and stability I had long searched for. It wasn't the life I had once dreamed of, but in many ways, it was better than anything I could have imagined. And for the first time, I felt truly free, free from the shadows of my past and the chains of addiction. I was finally living the life I had fought so hard to reclaim, surrounded by the people who mattered most. I never forgot the struggles that had brought me here, but I learned to live with them as part of who I had become. I was no longer just the man I used to be. I was a better version, forged by the fire of my mistakes, and stronger for having survived them. Thanks for watching. What do you think about Liam's choices and his path to redemption? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.